The Lightning take on the Leafs up in Toronto tonight for game one of the Stanley Cup playoffs. We talk about all of that with the guys with Locked On Leafs, but first, let's play that music.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Denker. This episode of Locked On Lightning is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. So, very exciting day in Lightning hockey. Game one of the Stanley Cup playoffs taking place tonight up in Toronto. And what better way to preview, to kick off game one day or the first day of the Stanley Cup playoffs for Lightning fans than to have the guys from Locked On Leafs do a crossover with us. So without further ado, here's the guys from Locked On Leafs.
Hello and welcome into this Locked On Leafs, Locked On Lightning crossover show. I'm Mike DeStefano with my co-host Dave Morasutti from Locked On Leafs. We've got Adam Denker, the host of Locked On Lightning, and the playoffs are finally here, fellas. We've known for a while it was going to be these two. It was made official a couple weeks ago, and here we are 50 weeks after last year's playoff series. Things will get going tonight. I'm excited for it. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Network. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. All right, fellas. Like I said, 50 weeks ago, these two teams faced off mano a mano. And Adam, it was your squad upsetting the Maple Leafs in 7 games en route to their third straight Stanley Cup final. Toronto, I mean, the biggest storyline is, they came out last year and said, yeah, we've learned all these lessons. We're right there. We're so close. Next year will be different. Dave, why don't we start off with you and your viewpoint heading into this series on what you think the main storyline is for Toronto and what this series means for them?
Yeah, it's coming over that mental hurdle that they've been unable to get over the last few years. They keep saying that they feel like they're there. Other teams like to compliment and say that this is a different Leafs team that they've seen in the past. Now they got to show it, right? It's nice to hear those comments. It's flattering, very flattering here. John Cooper called his team a defensive juggernaut. But we all know pumping the tires gets the team a little too overconfident. And when the first sign of adversity happens, this team does hit a roadblock. They do hit a wall. They got to find a way to instead of hitting the wall, they got to crush right through it. Sorry for the cliches there, but that's pretty much what I got there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, speaking from my perspective, obviously here in Toronto as well, I mean, it's 6 straight years where this team has been eliminated from the first round of the playoffs. First couple seasons, it didn't, not that it didn't matter, but they weren't expected to go on long, deep playoff runs. And then there's been some real tough playoff losses. The one against Montreal was awful, up 3-1. And here come the Canadiens, and they go all the way to the Stanley Cup final and ultimately lose to the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then, the following year they get Tampa, and that was a toughie. I thought Toronto played well enough to win. It really was a coin flip series. But this season, I think, means so much. There was questions last year after the loss to the Lightning about whether or not it's time for this team to blow it up because, at that point, they've gone 6 straight years without winning a round. And they decided to run it back, roll it back. I think this is the final season that this team has an opportunity to get it done. So when you think about, what's at stake for this series for the Toronto Maple Leafs, the future of the franchise, in my opinion, is at stake. I mean, if they come out and they lose in 5-6 games, we've got the general manager who's up for a contract this year. He came into the season as a lame duck GM without an extension given to him, so he could walk, or the Leafs could walk from him. You're a year away from your big gun, Austin Matthews, being an unrestricted free agent, along with William Nylander. And then 2 years away, you've got Mitch Marner. Depending on what happens with those 3 people who I just mentioned, who knows what his future is going to be. So for me, the future of this organization legitimately is on the line, I think, in this series against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I think the Leafs got a good shot. I think we can go into it a little bit in a couple of moments here. But I'm telling you, this is an extremely important 2 weeks for this Toronto franchise. What about with Tampa, Adam? Like, what's the temperature in Tampa Bay right now about what they're expecting heading into the series?
Well, I think as they are on every single year we get into the playoffs is a deep run. I think though that the question surrounding this team really is, do they have anything left in the tank this year? The Lightning have looked like at certain times one of the best teams in the league, and then at other times look like a lottery team. So with this Lightning team, you get Jekyll and Hyde, and I think along with, do they have a lot left in the tank? It really, the other question I think really for this Tampa Bay team really going into this series and is, what kind of team are we going to get on a nightly basis? Last year in the playoffs against the Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm sure you guys remember the Lightning sometimes on certain nights came out flying. They came out very competitive. And then on other times, they just looked like they had no gas left in the tank. So I really think, are we going to see a consistent Tampa team? Are we going to see a team that could get one more run to the Stanley Cup Finals in them? And really that's really going to be the burning question, not only in game one, but up until the conclusion of this series.
Well, I am curious, and it's probably something that you do talk about a lot on Locked On Lightning. So this one's more so for our listeners here on Locked On Leafs. Like, have you seen any kind of cracks in the armor that you haven't seen in the past, that the last little bit maybe lends you to believe that, all that wear and tear of 3 straight trips to the finals in, shortened seasons with COVID, like maybe that is all starting to finally catch up to the Lightning? Like, a lot of people anticipated maybe that was going to happen last year. Clearly it did not. But is there some concerns? Is there anything that you've seen that maybe this could be that season?
Yeah, 100%. I think that the thing that's really glaring for Lightning fans when they look at this team is uh, the defensive personnel. I mean, at times they've looked really, really suspect, especially on the transition, going back down the other way. And really, that's going to be the key, one of the keys actually for this Lightning team in this series against Toronto, because Toronto, I heard some stat earlier today that Toronto is one of the best teams in terms of transition offense. Maybe you guys might think differently or might agree. But Tampa Bay, depending on whether it's Toronto or lower level teams, have not fared well in that aspect of the game. So that's really going to be something that we're going to have to keep an eye on for this team, and really a thing that's going to be very concerning if Toronto can expose that early on.
Yeah, and a little bit later we're going to take a look at some key stats, and there are a couple that I am wondering about. One of which I'll say it right now is what you mentioned, and it's kind of the transition team. And I saw a stat about, I got a couple more stats in the chamber we could talk about later. So since you brought that up, I'll quickly ask you this one. But I did see a statistic that goals allowed off of the forecheck, like within 5 seconds of being forechecked, they're second last to only the Anaheim Ducks in terms of goals allowed in that scenario. Does that concern you?
Oh, 100%. I mean, we could talk about all the success that the Lightning have had over the last couple of years in the playoffs, but if you look really closely at all those games over the last couple of years, Mike, those are the things that the Lightning have been exposed on, and ironically enough, one of the players that did a very good job of doing that in the playoffs was Corey Perry, who now plays for them. So maybe somebody might take a little bit of page out of that book and see if that could maybe get things moving for the Maple Leafs in this series.
Yeah, we'll see. Like I said, we got a bunch of key stats, some X factors that we'll get to in a little bit, and some more burning questions that we have between the Leafs and the Lightning heading into round one, series one, which begins tonight. On the other side, we'll take a look at some players to watch on both sides and talk about who will be most impactful and why it matters. So that's coming up next. But before we get into all that, let me tell you about one of today's show sponsors, and that's FanDuel. Grand slams, no-hitters, and double plays are back, and there's no better place to be in on the MLB action than FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. That's because right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. You can also make a wager on this series, Leafs Lightning. Who you like? Toronto is favored on the FanDuel Sportsbook app, so you can go and make that wager if you please. But don't miss out on your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of the Locked On Network. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs, Locked On Lightning crossover episode. We got game one of round one starting tonight, fellas. I'm Mike DeStefano. I got Dave Morasutti and Adam Denker with me of Locked On Lightning, rather. And, this is a very star-studded series. Like, you look at both sides, and both teams are pretty deep and pretty star-studded up front. Dave, why don't we start with the Toronto Maple Leafs? Like, who are a couple of players that you believe are going to be key to this series? Who are the players to watch for the Leafs?
I mean, we got to start with the big boys up front, and I think Mitch Marner, he's the one that kind of drives everything that the Leafs do. When he is at his best, the Leafs are at their best. And so if he is able to come out and dominate like the Leafs believe he can, then it should give the Leafs that much more of an advantage, in a series where they got that many more superstars on the other side for the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, that's one guy certainly needs to take his game up to new levels. Austin Matthews, another guy, very clearly needs to take his game up to new levels. What about on the blue line, though? Is there anyone in particular you look at as someone who's going to have to make an impact for this team on the blue line?
I think Jake McCabe, new addition. He was brought in to be kind of that Jake Muzzin role, and we know Jake Muzzin was pretty good against the Lightning last year, and I think Jake McCabe is going to have to be equally as good or maybe even better to, he's going to see a lot of the top guys on Tampa. He's played such a pivotal role since coming to Toronto. He's probably going to be one of the more important ones is between him and Brody. I do think maybe McCabe, you see him in quite a few situations. So I think he's probably going to be the blue liner to watch for the Leafs in this series.
Yeah, he can kind of bring that pushback that the Leafs haven't really had much of in the past. Like, even when Muzzin was around last season, the last couple of years, he hasn't been fully healthy. Jake McCabe's healthy, and we saw him make an impact, blocking shots the last time these two teams played, a week and a half ago, thereabouts. What about the Lightning, Adam? Who are a couple of players that you're keeping an eye on for the Lightning that you think are going to be impactful in this series?
Well, I can't talk about Lightning playoff hockey unless I talk about Braden Point first. I mean, what a phenomenal year he's had. 51 goals, a career high. He does all types of things. He is just the human headache when it comes to playoff hockey for opposing teams. And so really, Braden Point, I'm looking for him to lead the charge offensively, alongside with Brandon Hagel, 30-goal season this year. Had a little bit of a slow start last year, didn't really do much in the playoffs, had kind of transitioned from being a scorer to a physical player, which, I can't complain about that. But this year he's really taken a step forward in his development and really become the player that the Lightning traded for last year. The other player, though, that I'm very curious to see how he performs as this series goes on is Anthony Cirelli. Got a little bit of a late start this year due to injury, came back from injury in December. So he's a little bit more fresher than most in this series. So hopefully he could get going down the middle. And that's really, a strong point of the Lightning offense right there.
Yeah, and not just Lightning offense, but Anthony Cirelli has been a guy who in the past has been able to shut down Austin Matthews. So being kind of, a defensive shutdown dude along with some of the offense that he can bring, he's certainly going to be one of those big impact players. I am curious, though, about one name that you did neglect to talk about, and it's Victor Hedman. He's been the X factor almost for that team for a few years now. I was taking a look at the numbers earlier today, and they don't look that favorable. Of all the players on the Tampa Bay Lightning, no player was on the ice for more expected goals than Victor Hedman this year on a per 60 basis. So that's not, a great stat to be leading. That's for sure. What's been your impressions on Victor Hedman and maybe the reasoning behind why the numbers don't look so great, and why potentially he's taken a step back this year? And are you worried about that at all?
Well, absolutely worried. I've been worried since game one this year, and really, I think the reasoning for his regression this year is, he started off kind of banged up coming out of training camp, suffered a lower body injury in late October. It seems as though he's been struggling with that all season long. On top of that, I just think it has been his confidence level with that injury. You could see him even getting back on plays. He's not making the right reads. He's not cutting off guys as you would normally see on the break. And I really think that is a point for concern for the Lightning, especially going up against a star-studded team in the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I definitely think that the Maple Leafs will try to exploit that from him, challenge him, try and say, all right, come and get me, big boy. And I really think at the end of the day, we're going to have to see one of those magic playoff performances from Hedman in order to counterbalance that, because I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that he is 100% healed and ready to go. I mean, he has had his moments where you could see the flashes of what has made him a great defensive defenseman, but it has been inconsistency all year for 77. So, but if he could get back to normal in this series, guess what? It's better late than never.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, if Leaf fans look at those numbers and say, "Oh, Hedman's washed," no, it's Victor Hedman. You still need to be worried that
Yeah.
that guy can turn it on a dime. Maybe he was just waiting, knowing that they could coast through the regular season. Didn't want to put too much strain on his, already tired body. But come playoffs, come tonight, that guy could flip a switch. We've seen it before. So he certainly is one that's going to be in the back of a lot of Leaf fans' minds, I'm sure. Neither player that was brought up from either of you two is one that plays between the pipes. I would imagine on Adam's side, there's no concerns there with the best goaltender in the world. But I know from a Leafs perspective, Samsonov, a big question mark right now going into the playoffs, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have an Andre Vasilevsky. Not many teams do have an Andre Vasilevsky in goal. And so, like, the Leafs didn't have terrible goaltending in the playoffs last year, but it wasn't good enough. And that's simply been what the issue's been with this Leafs team for the last few years. Is the goaltending hasn't been terrible, it just hasn't been good enough. That's all they need from Samsonov. Just, it's those timely saves this team just hasn't been able to get in the playoffs, especially in game 7. If we'd be talking about a totally different scenario if the Leafs had pulled off that victory in game 6 in overtime. But when you have an Andre Vasilevsky who is just, he just goes into this Terminator mode in elimination games, that's something that's going to consistently drive some fear of whether the Leafs can pull this off, because they just don't have that Andre Vasilevsky in that. But Samsonov has proven to be, better than what we expected. And, the playoffs, yes, he doesn't have great playoff numbers, but nobody expected him to do what he did this year. I think he's got a lot more confidence. I think confidence is a big thing for him. And if he plays with that confidence, he does have the pedigree to, I think, to get the Leafs to go past in this round. So it's going to be tough, but I think, the Leafs definitely probably feel better about their chances with their goaltending this time around.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, and I think that the defensive structure as a team definitely helps out. And I did hear multiple. I was reading a piece in the Athletic about the Maple Leafs and how they've transformed their defensive structure for the forwards to be helping out a lot more, which clearly helps. We got everybody working back. But I also thought there was a really interesting quote that came from practice yesterday from John Cooper from the Lightning, who said, "quote They're a dynamic offensive team with dynamic players, but they've really grown into a bit of a defensive juggernaut as well. That's a recipe you need to win in this league." And that's been the recipe that I believe, that quote ended, by the way. This is now my take on it. That is a recipe that I believe has allowed, the Leafs to succeed with Samsonov in net, because, he's playing really, really well. And, I think the guys in front of him are playing well and not allowing a whole lot of offense in front of them. They're limiting a lot of chances, and they're getting the puck out of the zone pretty quick by helping out. So that's a good sign if you are Toronto, that it's a lot more difficult to penetrate that defensive coverage this season than it was a year ago. when these two teams battled against one another literally 52 weeks ago. All right, let's take one more quick break, gentlemen. But when we get back, we'll look at some potential X factors in this game, some key stats that we've uncovered for each side. And of course, we got to give our final predictions as to who's going to win the series and in how many games. That'll all come up next. But first, Dave, having a word from one of our show sponsors.
Yes, today's special crossover episode is brought to you by AG1 by Athletic Greens. Keeping up with proper nutrition is really hard. You're busy, you're stuck at your desk, you're eating whatever you can just to get you through the day. But what if you could start your day with the ultimate daily nutritional insurance? With a single scoop of AG1 and a glass of water, you can do just that and absorb 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. Athletic Greens was created when the founder experienced a ton of gut health issues and ended up on a complicated supplement routine to recover, and it cost him $100 a day, which just isn't sustainable. He created Athletic Greens after experiencing how difficult it was to create an optimal nutritional routine on your own, and all for around $3 a day. So right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free trial packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NHL network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NHL network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs, Locked On Lightning crossover. I'm Mike DeStefano with my co-host Dave Morasutti. We're joined by Adam Denker of Locked On Lightning. Game 1 tonight between these two teams. Puck drop at 7:30. We're going to give our final predictions in just a moment, but a couple more things that we got to get to here in this preview crossover show. And quickly, I'll start with you on this one, Adam. Are there any burning questions that you have about this series that either you want to answer or that you have for us that we can maybe answer for you?
I actually want to ask you guys this question. It's been no secret throughout the course of the year the Lightning have struggled on the power play, and don't look at the numbers because in my opinion, no matter where the Lightning rank, if they're ranked in the top 10, I don't remember the last time I looked, but it's inflated. Now, as an opposing team, how much of a I guess how much of an inflated ego do you have sort of going into a series where the Lightning, it's really not a big deal if you draw a penalty, and we're going to have our fair share of power play minutes for both teams in this series. Are you afraid, or is there any kind of sort of nervousness around the Lightning possibly waking up, or are you confident in your PK?
Well, I'll take that first, actually. Let me quickly get a follow-up question on you just to understand your question a little bit more. You say that it's an inflated power play. I think last I checked, they're what, top 5 power play unit in the NHL? Like, what makes them inflated?
Well, because if you really watch every single game with this Lightning team, the issue lies is, they are scoring the goals. And like you said, they are top 5, and that's great. That's great on paper. But a lot of those power play goals don't really come when the team needs it. We'll have games where the Lightning will go 3 for 4 and against a team like the Red Wings, but then we'll go 0 for 8 against the Boston Bruins. We have to look
2 weeks ago.
Yeah. we have to look at those samples as, is this team just good against the lower tier teams, or is this kind of just other teams doing a very good job? And I like to think, the earlier number assumption is that, this team has been playing down to their competition at times, more times than not. And at least for Lightning fans, we are concerned about that. But yeah, like I said, I want to know on your side, how confident are you in your PK, even when, it's inflated in my opinion, but what is your opinion about that?
Yeah, I think the penalty kill has looked a lot better of late. They've added a lot of pieces at the deadline with the Ryan O'Reilly, Noel Acciari. They've got some guys, Jake McCabe on the back end. They've added players who certainly can carve out a nice role on the penalty kill. Mitch Marner's an elite penalty killer. Probably not, something that a lot of people around the NHL are aware of, but the guy's an elite defender and penalty killer, and you'll figure that out, Lightning fans, really quick this year. I'll say, like, I there is concern, but it's not necessarily about the PK. The concern more so is that the Leafs power play also has been garbage the last 3 years in the playoffs. That's been a big reason why they've lost 3 straight series. They just can't score on the power play at all. So even if Tampa, if they can inflate and end up with a couple of power play goals, like the Leafs power play the last 3 years on average has been 14% in the playoffs. 14%. So even if the Lightning is subpar, they go from, I think they're hovering around what, like 26, 25% right now. Even if they, go down to 18, 19%, that's still better than what the Leafs have averaged over the last 3 years. So I would say that there still is going to be concern because I think special teams always plays a factor in series that are going to be as tight as this. So yeah, I'd say, regardless, I guess, of what the perception is in Tampa, there's still some concerns in Toronto about how special teams can impact this series.
Yeah, and when I look at the special teams for Tampa, like there's just so many weapons that you just know that they're going to take advantage of any opportunity that they can. Like I when I saw them when I was at the game in Tampa, like I watch a guy like Sergachev who, you know, that's someone that the Leafs I don't think really account for because it's always about Stamkos and Kucherov. That a guy like Sergachev can just wire a puck
Yeah.
and get those easy chances there as well. The Leafs penalty kill has had its ups and downs this season. I think it's gone better with the right personnel with Ryan O'Reilly back in there, and it makes a huge difference. But I think really the Leafs power play is what will worry me because there's times where it looks really good, and there's times where it's just like, can we just decline the penalty here? Like it's just not even worth having it out
Yeah.
for 2 minutes. Like
Play better at 5-on-5. Just decline the penalty. NFL style. Just decline it.
exactly. So like I think really I think the Leafs power play I don't have as much confidence in it. I think the Lightning do just because the Lightning they have too many guys that know how to convert on those chances. It's been proven over the years and yeah, the numbers might suggest the Leafs one is better, but I still think the Lightning have the better guys who are more versed to know how to take advantage of those chances.
Put it this way, too. The Leafs power play went 81 games without basically touching it. Nylander was on the top unit. For some reason, in game 82, they decided to take him off and put Ryan O'Reilly up on the top unit. It's what we're going to see in game 1 as well. So there's a 1-game sample size of Ryan O'Reilly up on the top unit in this new look power play. So there is some intrigue there. You talk about burning questions. Leaf fans do wonder, how's the power play going to perform? Because that has not been very well over the last few seasons. Dave, I'll let you ask a question, whether it's one that you want to get answered yourself from a Leafs perspective, or if you got a question for Adam, go ahead and shoot your shot.
Well, I gotta ask Adam. Like, there's so many players on the Lightning. We hear all the time about the big stars, but who's the one guy that you feel like can kind of come under the radar here that maybe Leafs fans aren't too concerned about, but maybe they should be concerned about?
Well, I think Brandon Hagel. I have to say, like I said, he struggled immensely once he was traded to this team last year during the deadline from the Chicago Blackhawks. Didn't really do much of a lot in the playoffs last year. He had 1 goal in the first round though against the Toronto Maple Leafs, so that is a positive. 30-goal season this year. He's playing fast and loose out there, and that's what you want to see out of a guy who has the kind of skill that he has. Another guy that really comes to mind right now is Mikey Eyssimont, another guy that they picked up at the trade deadline this year. With Tanner Jeannot out for the foreseeable future, John Cooper said today that he's going to miss at least a couple of games in this series, probably might even the entirety of the series. So Mikey Eyssimont, you slide him into the wing position. I'm expecting him to come out and play fast. I'm expecting him to play physical. And when you have a guy like that who could also has a little skill down low, especially with the puck, I'm expecting John Cooper to let him just race around and do his thing. And I think really Leafs fans should be worried about him.
He's got some sneaky good, like high danger stats and expected numbers. Like he analytically for a big guy, he actually, fills some of those analytical stat sheets. I do find it's interesting because it's a name that I was not overly familiar with when they traded for him at the deadline. And then I looked into it and I was like, you know what? Actually, he's doing some things with that Lightning squad. I'm not going to sleep on him. That's for sure. But I will say this: it does seem like that's still a bit of a far cry from the Yanni Gord, the Blake Colemans, and Barclay Goodrow third liners that the Lightning had back in their, we'll call it heyday 2 years ago. X factors, boys. Who's going to be the X factor for the Toronto Maple Leafs, Dave?
Oh, X Factor. I'm gonna go with Ilya Samsonov.
Really?
Yeah, I think if he can, like, especially at home, where if the Leafs can find a way to win those first 2 games at home, takes a little bit of pressure off, right? They didn't do
Yeah.
that last year, and he's been so good at home. He's been elite. He's been Andre Vasilevsky like at home.
Wow.
And he's gonna have to do
Yeah.
that. He's gonna have to do that in this series. You got to. This is why the Leafs made sure they got home ice advantage. They knew the numbers that that Ilya Samsonov puts in Toronto. So I think he's going to be an X factor because the Leafs could do all these things to help bolster the blue line, help up front, but if they don't have it in net, they're not going to have it in this series.
Yeah, it's a good point. I probably would say Austin Matthews would be the guy for me as an X factor. And the only pushback I would say on Samsonov is he can be as good as he wants, but if the guy on the other end outduels him, I mean, it doesn't really matter. And the only way that I expect for the guy on the other end to not do that is if the core four and the big boys, aka Matthews and Marner, if they can be X factors and get the job done this year, finally, break through and have that, that big legendary series that they haven't had. Like, there's no career defining moments for these guys in the postseason. They just haven't come. If one of those two, Matthews or Marner, can kind of take, a hold of this series and potentially will this team through to the second round, I mean, now there is some legacy that's being built with those guys within this one. But the other player I would say sneaky X factor is going to be Ryan O'Reilly. Like, I think Ryan O'Reilly is a guy who, won a Conn Smythe, and he knows exactly how to play and knows how to win against winning the playoffs. And you look at him, he's been productive with the Maple Leafs since he got there. I think it's like 11 points in 13 games as a Toronto Maple Leaf. He's now playing up in the top 6 where he'll get, more responsibility and playing up on the top power play unit. He's going to kill penalties. This guy's going to be an absolute minute muncher for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So he's another sneaky little X factor, and fitting because his nickname is literally the Factor. So that's one more guy that I'll kind of toss into the ring here. Adam, what about for the Lightning? Who do you think is the X factor for that squad?
My first X factor is got to be Andre Vasilevsky. He's had a little bit of an up and down season. There's been times where he's looked fatigued, and then, good thing though, because the last couple of weeks he's looked like he's back to his old self. Now, the big question for him though is he's had a couple of days off. He tends to play a lot better when he's playing, a day here, a day here, having a couple of more days off than he's used to. Is that going to affect him at any moment? Are we going to see some rust out of him in game 1? So I think though, if he comes in and he plays like the Vasilevsky of old, I think that's going to be a huge boost for this team. My other X factor is Alex Killorn, 27 goals on the season, 64 points. Pretty much a non-factor in last year's playoffs. He had such an off postseason last year that you almost had to put out a wanted poster for him because he went missing that badly. But this year has turned into Alex Killorn's redemption year, especially it's a contract year for him because, I really think though, as well as he's played during the regular season, depending on whether or not he will come back to Tampa, I think really depends on how he plays in the postseason. So I think he's going to be a huge part of this Lightning offense. He's going to be that guy that could play physical down low, clean up the garbage along the boards as well, and play physical. And I'm really excited to see if he can continue his play into the playoffs.
Let's go through a couple of key stats that we've kind of uncovered about this series or heading into it. There's one that I've looked at, and to be honest, I'm curious to get your thoughts on it, Adam. And it's the road record for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Like, this is a team that's sub 500 when on the road. Think 18, 22 and 1 road record this year. Not what you expect to see out of a team that you expect to compete for a Stanley Cup. What's the theory behind that road record? Because Toronto's got a real stellar home record. And last I checked, there's going to be 4 games in Toronto that they're going to have to win one of them at least on the road to win the series?
Really, the thing that's been a big Achilles heel for them has been just their start to games. The first 5 to 10 minutes of the first period has been a real struggle for this team, and it really has been an enigma for John Cooper and this coaching staff since day one. Really, you come into a game winning spectacularly in the previous one, and it's kind of you're just starting from scratch. You haven't really seen that much consistency to their game, and then you factor in being on the road with that. It's a lot different, guys, when you're at home and you're able to kind of figure things out and get back into the groove of things when you have your home fans in front of you. Now you're tasked with not only going up to Toronto but playing in a playoff game. So that's going to be something that I'm going to be curious, and I'm sure Toronto fans are going to be curious to see how the Lightning can react in that situation. But yeah, absolutely, they have struggled immensely on the road this year, and really I think that's going to be a huge obstacle for them, especially like you said, they're going to have to win at least one of the games up in Toronto to win the series. So that's going to be real. Can the Maple Leafs shut down the Lightning at home is really going to be, I think last year, if mistaken me, I think both teams won every game at home last year in the playoff series. Yeah, so we might see something similar in this series as well.
Yeah, kind of trade wins back and forth with one another, and then Game 7's up for grabs, and well, we know what Vasilevsky 88 does over there in Game 7s for sure. So that's if you're Toronto, I think that the game plan for them is end this thing in 5 or 6. Don't let that get to deciding Game 7, because again, for whatever reason, he turns into John Wick the Boogeyman, and it's impossible to put pucks back past that guy. What's a key stat that you've kind of uncovered that you're keying in on for this series, Adam?
I was like before going back was the rush stats for the Lightning and the Leafs. The Leafs have been one of the better rush teams where the Lightning have immensely struggled. I think that as long as the Lightning could play well as they normally do in the neutral zone, I think they could counteract that. But yeah, if the Lightning give up too many transition opportunities, I think this is going to be a very short series for them.
Dave, anything that you've uncovered? Any tremendous information you'd like to share with the class?
Well, considering the Leafs and they had a heavy dose of road games and end their season. I think they went 5-1 in their last 6 road games, and they had to do it with some pretty tough circumstances in terms of how many players they could actually dress in the game and who was going to be their goaltender for some of those as well. But I think the big one here is William Nylander. William Nylander just decided he was going to throw as many pucks on the net as possible. And I think if William Nylander is able to heat up and get himself back to what we saw in the playoffs last year, he's someone that could. We talked about X Factor before. He's one that I think maybe will get overlooked a little bit here going into the playoffs here. I think in his last 2 games of the season, he had 11 shots on goal. Like, Nylander loves to put pucks on the net, but he did it at an incredibly high rate to end the season.
Question for you too, and this is the last one before we get to the predictions. How much do you guys believe in analytics and digging into some of the underlying numbers when it comes to goaltending statistics?
Not too much.
Yeah, the goaltending, not as much for me, but still, yeah, you always have to respect if the number supports something.
So I found one statistic that has to do with goaltending stats, which seemed like a big anomaly that last year that helped lead Tampa to victory. And I'm not so sure that they can rely on that again. Over the last 3 seasons prior to last year's playoff, the Bolts averaged an 858. And by Bolts, I clearly mean Vasilevsky because he's played every single game. The last 3 seasons, they've averaged an 858 high danger save percentage in those 3 postseasons. In the series against the Toronto Maple Leafs, that ballooned from an 858 high danger save percentage to a 942 high danger save percentage. The Leafs were converting at an 11% clip on high danger chances last year. It dropped to 3% in the playoffs with that 942. I don't know if that's sustainable from that team, the Tampa Bay Lightning. And if you could get 1 or 2 more goals from the big boys and they convert a little bit more, to me, that is kind of, a sneaky stat for me that kind of is another reason to edge Toronto a little bit more on the favorite side. And with that, unless you have any comments on that very intricate stat, we could get to the predictions.
I'll chime in real quick with that. I think it's really not so much about what Vasilevsky was doing in the crease with that stat. I think it really only falls back on what the guys were doing in front of him. And like I said before, the defensive play has been somewhat suspect throughout the course of the year. So I don't think those numbers are going to mean as much when we go into this series.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see. I don't know. That was a good team last year, 942. But again, we'll see if it's tremendous information or if it's horrendous information. I guess we'll find out at the end of the series. Speaking of the time that everyone's been waiting for, it's time for us to give our predictions. Dave, I'll let you go first. Who's going to win the series? How many games and why?
I'm gonna go Leafs in 6. I'm gonna
Why?
go Leafs in 6. I just think that what, the depth on blue line for the Lightning. I'm not sure if they have the horses this time around to overcome the Leafs. I think Andre Vasilevsky will steal them a couple of games for sure in this series, but I just think the Leafs have put themselves, especially with their depth, they should be able to get it done this year. I thought they were going to get it done in 6 last year. They almost did, and then we know how it happened there. But I think 6 seems to be the right number. I don't know if you're going to be able to, dominate the Lightning that much.
Yeah, I don't want to chance it to go back to Tampa after game 5. I'm going to go with Leafs in 5. Leafs in 5 games. I just no disrespect obviously to Adam and any of your listeners, but I just think that Tampa's, a shell of what they used to be. Like they're still a very good team. And look, I could be completely wrong about this, but it does seem like, their wear and tear is finally starting to catch up on them. And this has got to be the year that Toronto gets it done. There's so much pressure internally, both on the ice and also up above in management for that team to succeed this year and for the players themselves. And I just think when I look at last year's series, it was very much a coin flip where special teams played a factor primarily, I would say, and then hot goaltending in game 6 and game 7. Outside of that, it was very much a 50-50 series. And when I match up the lineups that Toronto had last year to Tampa's, and then I do that to what we see this year compared to Tampa's team this season, Toronto to me got better, Tampa got weaker. So if it was a 50-50 coin flip last year, I think that nudges into Toronto's favor. I do believe that they can maybe pick on some of those blue liners. Like I don't know, forgive me if I'm wrong, but Nick Perbix and Darren Radish don't seem like top 4 defenders to me, but you've got them on your first and second pair. 2 of those guys are going to be tasked to shut down a Matthews and Nylander, Riley, Tavares, Marner. Might be a little much for Darren Radish. So, reasons like that is why I'm picking the Maple Leafs. I think it's finally the year that they get through to the second round for the first time since 2004. Adam.
Well, I guess my whole thing with this is that up until now, the Leafs haven't shown that they could get past the first round.
Yeah.
I think, and a lot of Lightning fans and maybe some general hockey fans will say, prove me otherwise. And so really that's going to be a tough task. Like you said, a lot of pressure on the Leafs to turn things around in the playoffs this year. My prediction really is Bolts in 7. I think that games 1 through 3 are going to be very telling of what kind of series this is going to be for Tampa Bay. Are we going to see a team that is still trying to figure it out in game 3? If that's the case, it's going to be a very short series. If we see a team that is solid, that has at least split the first 2 games of the series, I think we are on the right track for possibly the Lightning getting back into that mode of winning and getting deep back into the playoffs. My thing is that the Lightning, in order for them to get past Toronto, they need to keep this series going as long as possible. I'd be very shocked if we see a very short series with the Lightning, some sort of winning in 5 scenario. I think everybody would be shocked with that. I'd be shocked. I think the players on the Lightning would be shocked with that. I think, though, really, as the series goes on, this team will get better. They'll learn. And like you said, Andre Vasilevsky will steal a couple of games for them. So it's all about it coming together. And like I said, yeah, Lightning in 7.
All right. Well, I didn't expect a different answer, to be honest. I thought you'd be confident with your Lightning, and Dave and I believe in the Leafs this year. The thing is, like, these two teams are. It's a shame that one of them has to get eliminated in round one because these are certainly two of the top 8 teams that deserve to go through longer than just one round. But that's Gary's NHL, the way that it's all set up. But what we can be excited for is the next couple of weeks. It's going to be one hell of a series. I can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun. Really appreciate you doing this, Adam, Dave. Good stuff. And let's see what happens. 7-game series, first to 4 wins. Can Toronto make it to the second round for the first time in 19 years? And can Tampa try and get themselves into a cup final? Again, 4 straight years. So both of them looking to Tampa's looking to extend a streak. The Leafs looking to end a streak. We'll see which one comes to a halt here in a couple of weeks. All right, that'll do it for us today. Thank you so much for listening to the Locked On Leafs, Locked On Lightning crossover. Game 1, 7:30 puck drop. Enjoy.